It had been one of those weeks, the kind where each day feels longer than the last, where the demands of work seem endless and the exhaustion builds up like an insurmountable wall. I barely made it through the door before I collapsed on the couch, still in my work clothes, shoes kicked lazily to the side, my whole body aching, and as soon as my head hit the pillow I felt the weight of my exhaustion pull me underneath. I wasn't planning on sleeping, not like this, but within minutes I felt myself drifting into a deep, dreamless sleep, surrendering to the comfort of the couch. Hours must have passed, though I had no sense of time, the world outside fading away, and for a while there was nothing but the quiet embrace of sleep, that is, until I felt it, an ever so slight shift beside me. It wasn't much, just the subtle weight of someone sitting on the couch, but it was enough to wake me from my slumber. I didn't think much of it at first. It wasn't unusual for Liam, my nephew, to join me when he thought I was asleep. He'd done it before, slipping onto the couch without saying a word, but tonight something felt different. There was a certain heaviness in the air, a quiet tension that prickled at the edges of my consciousness. The warmth of his body was close, too close. I kept my eyes closed, thinking of sleep, but my mind was suddenly alert, every nerve buzzing with a strange anticipation. His breathing was steady, soft. I lay there still pretending to be asleep, trying to make sense of what was happening. It wasn't just his presence that was different, it was the way he moved, the way he touched me. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if testing the waters, waiting to see how I would react. But I didn't move. I couldn't. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and questions. Why was he there? It wasn't like Liam to be so bold, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this tension between us had been there for a long time. There had been moments before, fleeting glances, brief touches that had lasted just a little too long, but I had always brushed them off, convincing myself that it was nothing more than familial affection. But now I was lying here, feeling the heat of his body pressed against mine. I couldn't deny there was more to it. He knew what he was doing. The way his hand brushed across my shoulder, sliding slowly down my arm, was far too intimate to be innocent. I could feel the heat of his breath on the back of my neck, and every nerve in my body was on alert. On high alert. My mind screamed at me to say something to stop this, but my body refused to move. And then, as if sensing my hesitation, he leaned closer, his lips brushing against my ear so softly I thought I was imagining it, but I wasn't. I felt it, and it sent a shiver down my spine. I wanted to believe that this was all in my head, that I was still dreaming, but every touch felt too real. The softness of his fingers running down my side, the warmth of his breath against my skin, it was all too vivid to be a dream. I lay there frozen, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to make sense of what was happening. This wasn't just some innocent game of teasing. His touch was deliberate, calculated, as if he had been waiting for this moment for a long time, and maybe I had been waiting too. I had been waiting too, ignoring the signs for so long, telling myself that there was nothing more between us than the bond of family, but now I couldn't ignore it anymore. As his hand slid down to my waist, pulling me closer to him, I felt my breath catch in my throat, every fiber of my being screaming at me to move, to say something, to stop this before it went any further. But I couldn't, I wouldn't. I kept my eyes closed, pretending to be asleep, even though I knew he could feel the tension in my body. And then I felt it, a soft, feathery kiss against the back of my head. The moment his lips brushed against my neck, the world seemed to tilt, time slowed, my breath caught in my throat as the reality of the situation finally hit me. This wasn't a dream, this was happening, and every sensation I felt was real, every caress, every breath, every beat of my body. Every breath, every beat of my racing heart. My eyes were still closed, but I couldn't pretend any longer. I slowly turned to face him, unsure of what I would see. When I finally opened my eyes, my heart pounding in my chest, and for a brief moment I considered pulling away, ending this before it went any further. But then our eyes met. Liam's gaze was intense. A mixture of mischief, desire, and something deeper that I couldn't quite place. His dark eyes were full of longing, and in that moment everything became clear. This wasn't something that had just happened overnight. It had been building for a long time, simmering beneath the surface, and tonight, for a moment, it had finally reached its breaking point. I didn't say a word. The silence between us was thick with unspoken tension, the weight of everything we'd kept hidden for so long pressing down on us. I swallowed hard, trying to find my voice, but before I could say anything he leaned in, his lips brushing lightly against mine. The kiss was soft, hesitant at first, as if he was waiting for me to stop him, but I didn't. Instead, I kissed him back, and in that instant everything changed. The floodgates opened, years of repressed emotions, desires and tensions came to the surface. His hands found their way to my hair, pulling me closer as the kiss deepened. There was now a sense of urgency, a need to make up for all the time we had spent pretending it didn't exist. His lips were soft but insistent, and I melted. His lips were soft but insistent, and I melted into him, letting myself get lost in the intensity of the moment. It felt like everything I'd been holding back, all the emotions I'd been trying to ignore, were pouring out in that kiss. The tension between us snapped, and suddenly nothing else mattered. It didn't matter that this was my nephew. It didn't matter that there would be consequences. As the kiss deepened, the intensity between us grew, his hands roaming over my body, exploring with a newfound boldness that left me breathless. Each touch, each lingering caress sent waves of warmth through me, and I found myself responding in kind, pulling him closer. Closer with each passing second. The room around us seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of us tangled together in a moment that felt both forbidden and inevitable. His hands slipped under my shirt, his fingers tracing patterns across my skin that made my heart race. I could feel the weight of his body pressing against mine, his breath warm against my skin as his lips trailed down my neck, each touch sending a jolt of electricity through me, and I gasped, my hands finding their way to his shoulders, clutching him as if he were the only thing keeping me grounded. There was a part of me that wanted to stop, that wanted to pull away, that wanted to think. This was something we had both wanted for so long, something we had both denied ourselves, and now that the floodgates had opened there was no turning back. His hands were everywhere, exploring my body with a hunger that matched my own. It was as if he knew exactly where to touch, exactly what to do to drive me crazy. Every kiss, every touch, every whispered breath against my skin ignited a fire inside me that I couldn't control. I pulled him closer, my hands tangled in his hair as I kissed him with a fervor I didn't know I was capable of. The intensity of the moment was overwhelming. Overwhelming, but I didn't want it to stop. I didn't want to think about the consequences or what it meant for us. All I could focus on was the way he made me feel in that moment, alive, desired, consumed. Eventually the intensity began to subside, and we found ourselves lying together, tangled in each other's arms, our breaths coming in a slow, steady rhythm, the silence between us no longer thick. The silence between us was no longer thick with tension, but rather with the comfort of finally acknowledging what had been simmering between us for so long. For a while neither of us spoke, we just lay there, our bodies pressed together, basking in the afterglow of what had just happened. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, questions and uncertainties, but one thing was clear. One thing was clear, I didn't regret it, not one moment of it. As I rested my head on Liam's chest, I could feel the steady rise and fall of his breath, a soothing rhythm that kept me grounded in the present, but the silence couldn't last forever. There were things that needed to be said, confessions that had been left unspoken for too long. Liam said softly, breaking the silence, his voice soft, almost hesitant, as if he wasn't sure how I would react. His confession sent a jolt through me, though I wasn't surprised. Deep down I had known it too, I just hadn't been ready to face it until now. Me too, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. The words felt both foreign and familiar, as if they had been waiting to be said all along. They had been waiting to be spoken all along. We stayed like that for hours, wrapped in each other, sharing silent confessions in the dark. It was as if the weight of everything we had been holding back had finally been lifted, leaving us with nothing but the raw, unfiltered truth. I didn't know how to tell you, Liam said at one point, his voice thick with emotion. Thick with emotion. I didn't even know if you felt the same way. I didn't know how to tell myself, I replied honestly. For so long I had been in denial, convincing myself that what I felt was nothing more than a fleeting attraction, a confusing blur of emotions that meant nothing. But now, lying here with him, I knew the truth. I had always known there was something incredibly freeing. There was something incredibly freeing about finally admitting it. Not just to him but to myself. For so long I had been afraid of what it might mean, afraid of crossing that line, but now there was no turning back, and I didn't want to. As the hours passed we remained tangled in each other, our bodies pressed together as we whispered to each other in the dark. Morning came slowly, the soft light of dawn creeping through the curtains and casting a golden glow over the room. I stirred at first, blinking against the light as reality began to sink into the warmth of the room. Liam's body was still pressed against mine, his arm draped lazily over my waist, his breath slow and steady against my neck. For a moment I allowed myself to enjoy the comfort, the warmth, the closeness, the quiet peace that came from simply being together. But as the sunlight grew brighter, so did the weight of reality. We couldn't stay here. The night had been perfect, perfect forever, but the morning brought with it questions neither of us were ready to answer. What happened now? Where did we go from here? Would this change everything? Liam stirred beside me, his eyes fluttering open as he looked at me with a soft, sleepy smile. For a brief moment everything felt normal, like nothing had changed. I didn't have an answer for him. I wasn't sure what would happen next. All I knew was that I didn't regret what had happened and I didn't want it to end. What would you do if you were in their shoes?